and protection of human rights, and also provides an opportunity for the countries to speak out of their challenges ahead. In this regard, we would like to thank in advance all the delegations who will intervene. We will take into consideration with interest and respect the advices, suggestions, and recommendations. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kazem Gharibabadi, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Legal and International Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran, to present his introductory remarks. Please, you have the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset I would like to express my pleasure at attending the 48th session of the UPR Working Group. The National Report of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is now before you, outlines the range of measures and initiatives undertaken by Iran to promote human rights across all dimensions since the third cycle of the UPR. During this period, particular attention has been paid to the protection of vulnerable groups. Significant measures have also been adopted to develop rural and nomadic areas, mitigate the impacts of climate change and natural hazards on people's lives, and provide support to refugees and migrants. Given the human rights education strengthens and consolidates the foundations of respect for and the guarantee of fundamental rights and freedoms, Iran remains firmly committed to advancing this cause across all sectors for the benefit of its citizens, judges, lawyers, law enforcement officers, prison officials, and government employees. The Ministry of Education has incorporated human rights topics into students' educational programs. At the university level, human rights has been established as a specialized field of study offered as a master's degree. During the very same period, over 800 human and citizens' rights training courses amounting to 280,000 participant hours were conducted for judges, law enforcement personnel, and prison staff. Furthermore, more than 186 human rights-related books were published between 2022 and 2023. To raise public awareness, over 6,300 educational messages were also broadcast via radio and television networks during this period. Mr. President, I would like to once again underscore the Islamic Republic of Iran's commitment to its international human rights obligations and its substantive engagement with the human rights mechanisms of the United Nations. Allow me to briefly highlight some of the key aspects of this engagement as follows. Submission of the fourth periodic report on the implementation of ICCPR and its review in October 2023. Submission of the 20th to 27th periodic reports on the implementation of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and their review in August 2024. Submission of the 5th and 6th periodic reports on the Convention on the Rights of the Child to the United Nations Committee to the Rights of the Child in November 2023. Visit of the Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights to Tehran in February 2024, including discussions and meetings with senior Iranian officials and representatives of civil society. Conclusion of a memorandum of understanding with the OHCHR in September 2024, with the first phase of its implementation carried out in December 2024 in Geneva, focused on capital punishment and the concept of most serious crimes, with the participation of expert delegations from both sides. Visit of the Special Rapporteur on UCMs to Iran from May 7th to 18th, 2022. Responses to more than 233 communications from Special Procedures Mandate holders between 2020 to 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, according to the Human Development Report of the United Nations Development Programme, Iran, despite oppressive and inhuman sanctions, remained categorized as a high human development country. I must emphasize that since the implementation of the third cycle of UPR recommendations, substantial intellectual, human and financial investments have been made to improve the lives of the Iranian people. yielding significant progress. Allow me to outline some of these achievements as follows. Complete elimination of the gender gap in education at the primary and secondary levels. Currently, the ratio of female to male students stands at 49%. Coverage of 93% of the rural and 98% of urban areas under the National Health Network. Reduction of hospitalization costs borne by the public from 37% to 3% for rural residents and 6% for urban dwellers. Free provision of certain medical treatment for patients with special diseases covered under the Social Security Organization. Launch of 34 specialized hospitals dedicated to supporting mothers and children. Increased access to safe drinking water, now exceeding 86% in rural and 99% in urban areas. Full electrification of urban areas and connection of over 99% of rural villages to the national electricity grid. Internet and telephone network coverage for 95% of the rural population. Construction and reinforcement of 350,000 rural housing units alongside loans provided for the renovation and improvement of nearly 550,000 rural homes. Revitalization of 8,400 dormant production units under the law supporting sustainable development and employment creation in rural and nomadic regions. Delivery of skill enhancement training to over 2 million individuals, which 51% of these programs were conducted for women and girls. Allocation of 3% of revenues from crude oil and natural gas exports to the development of the less developed areas. Furthermore, a significant portion of the annual budget has been dedicated to provincial poverty alleviation programs. Targeted cash and non-cash subsidies to people in vulnerable situations to mitigate the negative impacts of unilateral sanctions. Allocation of approximately 6% of the public resources budget to compensate for damages from major natural disasters and to reconstruct areas affected by flood and earthquake. Approval of the general framework of the draft bill on the prevention of harm to women and enhancement of their security against abuse. Operation of 145 political parties. Operation of more than 14,000 labor and employer organizations across the country. Free operation of approximately 300 churches in Iran. Activities of 57 associations and organizations related to religious minorities. Over 1,900 Sunni managers serving in various managerial positions. Operation of more than 39 judicial support offices for children and women across the country. Access to fixed and mobile internet services for over 100 million, for more than 100 million users. Activities of over 23,500 female authors, along with 1,051 female publishers and 806 women serving as media managers. Presence of more than 130,000 attorneys practicing law in Iran. Establishment of 31 employment units for inmates. Implementation of vocational training programs for a significant number of prisoners. Women comprising 33% of university faculty members. Reduction of maternal mortality rates to 20 per 100,000 live births. Appointment of 5 women as vice president, minister or government spokesperson by President Pezeshkian, and election of 14 women to parliament in the most recent elections. Participation of more than 1,006 female judges in the judicial system. Hosting up to 8 million refugees and undocumented migrants. Free education for over 700,000 Afghan students in Iranian school at the current time. Ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic Republic of Iran has pursued the implementation of the third cycle recommendations while confronting significant and impact restrictions and challenges. During the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, my country mobilized all its resources and capacities to combat this deadly disease. Thanks to the advancements achieved within the framework of the Health System Transformation Plan, coupled with the support and cooperation of the public, as well as the selfless dedication of our medical and caregiving personnel, Iran successfully managed this difficult period. Unfortunately, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the most severe regime of unilateral sanctions against Iran persisted. Despite calls by the United Nations Secretary General and the Special Rapporteur on UCMs for sanction-imposing states to ease such sanctions, the United States continued its illegal behavior in violation of the order issued by the International Court of Justice on October 2018, which obligated the United States to implement humanitarian exemptions. As a result, many governments and businesses, fearing penalties, refrained from engaging in international transactions, even for humanitarian purposes. At this point, I feel it is necessary to express gratitude to those countries that, adopting a humanitarian approach and disregarding the consequences of sanctions in violation of international law, choose to cooperate with Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, in this forum, I would like to draw the attention of awakened and conscientious minds to the necessity of protecting the dignity of every human being under all circumstances of vulnerability. The people of my country are victims of aggression stemming from an economic assault. The continued imposition of unilateral coercive measures and secondary sanctions has created profound restrictions in areas such as business operations, access to financial resources, foreign investment, trade, technology transfer, reconstruction, and the procurement of medical supplies and pharmaceuticals, particularly for patients with complex or life-threatening illnesses. It has also adversely impacted services like air transportation. Consequently, these actions have gravely violated the fundamental rights of our people, especially their right to life and well-being. These arbitrary measures are in blatant violation of international law, including the principles of non-intervention, sovereign equality of states, the right to self-determination, the prohibition of discrimination, and the obligation to respect fundamental human rights. Iran's official policy is to mitigate the impacts of unilateral and arbitrary coercive measures. In response to the far-reaching unilateral sanctions imposed by the United States against its people, Iran has devoted special attention to the devastating effects of such actions in all processes related to the formulation of laws, regulations, policies, and executive measures to alleviate the impact of sanctions on the lives of its people. Nonetheless, these efforts do not absolve the architects and enforcers of sanctions from responsibility. They must be held accountable for what constitutes crimes against humanity and war crimes. Let us not forget that economic sanctions function as weapons, indeed weapons more devastating than conventional arms, for they disrupt and endanger the lives of entire populations. Another significant challenge facing Iran is the threat of terrorism. Terrorism poses a grave danger to peace and stability, not only within nations, but also to the global community as a whole. Over the past 4 decades, terrorists have claimed the lives of more than 23,000 innocent people in Iran. Among these, the terrorist group Munafiqeen, which now enjoys safe haven in certain Western countries, has assassinated 17,000 individuals. Ironically, the same terrorist group audaciously portrays itself as a defender of human rights. In the most recent terrorist act on Saturday, 2 prominent judges who had made extensive professional contributions to the administration of justice were assassinated. In this forum, convened to support human rights, or call upon all governments and the United Nations entities to adopt a firm, political and non-selective approach in combating terrorism and to cooperate in the legal prosecution of those responsible for terrorist acts. Thank you for your attention.
Je vous remercie pour cette intervention. Nous allons maintenant commencer.
Thank you for that statement. We'll now begin the interactive dialogue. Before giving the floor to delegations for questions and comments, I would remind you that speaking time will be 1 minute 5 seconds for all. I'd also like to remind you that issues of bilateral and territorial nature, political nature, should be kept out of our deliberations. And UN terminology should be used when referring to states and territories. Let me also recall that the use of the words recommend or recommendation will ensure that the relevant parts of your statements are included in the recommendations section of the Working Group report. Finally, I want to stress that the Human Rights Council strongly rejects any act of intimidation or reprisal against individuals and groups who cooperate or have cooperated with the United Nations and its representatives and mechanisms in the field of human rights. I'll now move to the list of speakers.
Distinguished representative of Oman.
شكرا سعادة الرئيس واسمحوا لي في البداية.
Thank you, President. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on accession to the presidency of the Council. So my delegation would like to wish a warm welcome to the friendly delegation of Iran. We appreciate their efforts in preparing this report and their interaction with the UPR. We've taken note of the national report and we appreciate the efforts made by the Islamic Republic of Iran in the field of education, especially in reducing the gap between genders at primary and secondary levels. In a constructive spirit, we have make the following recommendations. 1, continue to offer various opportunities for education to expand the scope of education at a universal level. 2, make efforts to support the right to health care and for better conditions, particularly in rural areas. 3, continue implementation of training and outreach programs to better disseminate the culture of human rights. Finally, we wish the Islamic Republic of Iran every success during this review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We warmly welcome the delegation of Iran and thank it for presentation of the 4th UPR report. Despite the restrictions faced by Iran to access international markets and the international financial institutions, we appreciate the administrative, policy and legislative steps taken by Iran to strengthen human rights mechanisms in its country. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we have the following recommendations. Continue taking effective steps to promote and protect human rights in line with its international human rights obligations. Continued enhanced allocation of resources for the country's human rights institutions. Continue to support educational initiatives for children with a focus on developing their skills. We wish Iran a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Paraguay.
Thank you, President. We're grateful for the report from Iran. We stress the importance of transparent, good faith cooperation with the human rights mechanisms to strengthen the international protection system. Respectfully, we would recommend 1, ratify international human rights treaties that Iran is not yet a party to and cooperate with Human Rights Council special procedures, especially with the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Iran. 2, refrain from applying the death penalty, abolish it and introduce an immediate moratorium thereto. 3, undertake reforms to guarantee full independence of the judiciary and ensure transparency in judicial appointments. 4, eliminate discrimination against women, which constitute human rights violations both at legislative level and in practice. 5, adopt specific effective measures to address structural socioeconomic inequalities, coordinating strategies to achieve a social protection system with a human rights approach which ensures a decent level of standard of living for all without discrimination. 6, establish a national mechanism for implementation, reporting and follow-up to human rights recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Mr. President, we welcome the distinguished delegation of Iran. We recognize Iran's human rights education initiatives and the steps taken towards the establishment of a national human rights institution. We also welcome the strides made in advancing women's active participation in economic and political affairs during the review period. We note in particular the appointment of women to key government positions covering the roads and urban development portfolio, women and family affairs, and environmental protection, among others. In a constructive spirit, allow us to offer the following recommendations. 1, consider ratifying the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 2, further pursue judicial reforms, including the possibility of implementing a moratorium on the death penalty, especially concerning minors. And 3, continue to strengthen normative and institutional human rights frameworks in line with international human rights obligations, especially as regards women, children, persons with disabilities, and minority groups. Mr. President, the Philippines wishes Iran success in this review process. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Portugal welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. Portugal takes note of the intention announced by the authorities to lift restrictions to some digital platforms and encourages further steps in this regard. Portugal recommends that the Islamic Republic of Iran, 1, establishes a formal moratorium of the death penalty as a step towards its abolition, and as a first step, prohibits its application to offenses committed by minors. 2, criminalizes all forms of gender-based violence, including domestic violence and marital rape. 3, cooperates with all UN mechanisms, including the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Portugal wishes the Islamic Republic of Iran a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar. Qatar not here. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We acknowledge Iran's legislative efforts to protect the rights of children, adolescents, and women, and to promote online freedom. We also recognize generous and inclusive refugee policies as the largest host country of Afghan refugees. However, we remain concerned about the human rights situation in Iran and recommend the following. 1, expedite its efforts to ratify the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Convention Against Torture. 2, ensure the human rights defenders are not subjected to intimidation, harassment, arbitrary arrest, or detention for exercising their right to freedom of expression, both online and offline, as well as the right to peaceful assembly and association. 3, strengthen its efforts to guarantee accountability through independent, impartial, and transparent investigation into allegations of human rights violations. We wish Iran a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Moldova.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Moldova welcomes the delegation of Iran. We remain concerned about the human rights situation in Iran, including the considerable increase in number of executions, appalling human rights violations during the protests, and lack of fair trial. Republic of Moldova recommends 1, ensure accountability for cases of killings, torture, and other human rights violations occurred including during the peaceful protests. 2, criminalize all forms of violence against women and ratify the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 3, engage and cooperate with the mandate of Special Rapporteur and grant unhindered access to the country. 4, take concrete measures for the creation of a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. 5, commute all death sentences and establish an immediate moratorium on death penalty with a view of abolishing it. We wish Iran success for its review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Romania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Romania welcomes the participation of the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran to this UPR cycle. Romania would like to make the following recommendations. Ratify the International Convention Against Torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the second optional protocol to the ICCPR, aiming at the abolition of death penalty. Enact legislation to ban child marriages and raise the minimum age of marriage for girls and boys to 18 years. Romania wishes the Islamic Republic of Iran success with this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
President. We thank the delegation of Iran for presenting their report. We note that it contains an objective picture of the human rights situation in the country. We very much welcome Iran's cooperation with the human rights treaty bodies and their openness for dialogue. Russia categorically rejects attempts to politicize the issue of protection of human rights, which in the hands of the collective West has become an instrument for pressuring dissenting states. With Iran, it's clear how pseudo-humanistic pretexts are used by the West to implement a tried and tested policy to destabilize the internal situation, undermine the foundation of constitutional order, sparking unrest or introducing UCMs. It's unacceptable for the West to adopt destructive approaches on the platform of specialized international entities, including the 2022 decision they pushed through to exclude Iran from the UN Commission on CEDAW, and the annually adopted decision in the Human Rights Council and the Third Committee, the resolution on Iran. We recommend to Iran as follows: continue efforts to lift UCMs, which negatively impacting the implementation of economic, social and cultural rights of citizens, continue collecting evidence of negative impact of UCMs, and exchange information with the and this fourth cycle of the UPR. My delegation notes with satisfaction the series of legislative and regulatory measures to bolster the legal normative framework on human rights. It also welcomes outreach work undertaken by the authorities to promote human rights education. In a constructive spirit, my country encourages the Islamic Republic of Iran to implement the following recommendations. First, envisage finalizing the reform process of the NHRI in line with the Paris Principles. To study the possibility of acceding to international legal instruments on human rights that the country is not yet a party to. In conclusion, Senegal wishes every success to the Islamic Republic of Iran in implementing the recommendations accepted. Thank you.
Merci. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Serbia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Serbia welcomes the delegation of Iran, commends for the national report and its presentation today, as well as its cooperation with the UPR. We recognize positive steps taken in implementing the recommendations from the previous UPR cycle. We would like to recommend Iran the following. 1. Expedite the establishment of a national human rights institution in accordance with the Paris Principles. 2. Provide the legal framework that fully protects against discrimination in all areas, including a comprehensive list of prohibited grounds for discrimination in line with the international standards. And 3, step up efforts to improve the quality of education, especially in rural areas, including for persons with disabilities. Serbia wishes Iran a successful review process. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, President. Sierra Leone welcomes the Iranian delegation. We commend the government for adopting the Health System Transformation Plan, which aims to reduce the financial burden of healthcare services on its citizens and improve overall access to quality medical treatment. We welcome the constitutional guarantee of the rights to freedom of expression, which is fundamental to fostering an open and democratic society. We note that the executive regulations of the prison organization explicitly prohibit all forms of torture and ill treatment of prisoners. We encourage the government to continue to strengthen these efforts by ensuring the full and effective implementation and enforcement of these policies to further promote and protect the rights and well-being of its citizens. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we offer the following recommendations. 1. Continue to strengthen efforts in promoting religious tolerance to foster peaceful coexistence and social harmony. 2. Consider placing a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its eventual abolition. 3. Enhance efforts to ensure greater participation of women in politics and public life. And 4, ratify the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Sierra Leone wishes the Islamic Republic of Iran a successful review, and I thank you, President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore.
Mr. President, Singapore welcomes the participation of the Islamic Republic of Iran in the UPR process and notes the progress it has made since its third review. Singapore welcomes the efforts made by Iran to improve access to education, in particular in bridging the gender gap in primary and secondary education. Singapore recommends that Iran continue to promote access to education, particularly in rural areas. We also commend the efforts Iran has made in reducing maternal and child mortality, as well as the implementation of the Livelihood Assistance Plan to support the nutrition of mothers in needy households. Singapore recommends that Iran continue to prioritize enhancing access to healthcare and improving healthcare infrastructure, especially for maternal and child health.
We wish Iran a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Slovenia commends the delegation of Iran for the national report and its presentation today. In line with Slovenia's recommendations to Iran from the third UPR cycle, we would like to repeat our recommendation to Iran to ratify core human rights instruments, including the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Regarding the participation of women, we would like to once again recommend to Iran to bolster its efforts to increase the representation of women in public and political life, particularly in decision-making positions. In relation to the Women Life Freedom protests, we recommend to Iran to release all persons arbitrarily arrested for participating in protests or for non-compliance with the mandatory hijab, and to reverse laws that discriminate women and girls. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Thank you, President. Spain welcomes the participation of Iran and states its concern at the general human rights situation in the country. Spain recommends, one, given the high figures of public executions and of minors, ratify the second optional protocol to International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and reform the criminal code to restrict the death penalty for the most serious crimes as a first step towards abolition. 2, ratify the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and take necessary measures to eliminate repression and discriminatory laws against women. 3, combat discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation or gender identity and decriminalise consensual relations between same-sex persons. 4, guarantee religious freedom and freedom of conscience for minorities such as the Baha'i community, adopting specific measures to eliminate discrimination and improve their protection. 5, take necessary measures to end acts of harassment, intimidation and violence towards human rights defenders, journalists and civil society. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka by video.
Mr. President, Sri Lanka appreciates the actions taken by the government of Islamic Republic of Iran for the welfare of women and children and to improve the healthcare system. In a constructive spirit, Sri Lanka wishes to recommend the government of Iran, 1, to accede to the Convention Against Torture, 2, to accelerate the establishment of an independent national human rights institution, 3, to continue efforts in reducing poverty, particularly in rural areas, and ensuring equitable access to resources and opportunities. 4, to ensure equitable access to quality education while reducing disparities in rural areas. 5, to enhance and modernize healthcare services with equitable access to affordable, high-quality medical care for all. 6, to uphold the rights of women and to provide equal opportunities in the workforce and strengthening women's participation in economic activities. 7, to consider adopting a moratorium on the death penalty. Sri Lanka wishes the government of Islamic Republic of Iran success in its UPR engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. President. The State of Palestine welcomes the delegation of Iran to the fourth cycle of the UPR and thanks them for the presentation of their report. We welcome Iran's efforts in promoting and protecting human rights in the country. We would like to recommend the following: to continue its efforts regarding education and to adopt policies to enhance inclusion of education for all, to continue its efforts in strengthening the health sector and ensuring inclusive access for all, to continue to adhere to more international human rights conventions. The State of Palestine wishes Iran a successful review, and I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sudan.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. السودان يرحب Thank you, President. We warmly welcome the high-level delegation from Iran, led by His Excellency the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and for International Legal Issues. We note the progress achieved in protecting and promoting human rights. We welcome the adoption of a law protecting children and adolescents, and also commend efforts to provide training for judges, penitentiary personnel, and launch reforms in the human rights area. We hope to see broader coverage by the health system to cover rural areas. To continue these efforts and meet the needs of young people, we would like to see more job opportunities created, promoting training programs, as well as entrepreneurial initiatives and national programs and policies for rural development, including achieving subsistence minima and boosting agricultural productivity. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sweden.
Mr. President, Sweden remains deeply concerned about the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran, including the situation for women and girls and the widespread use of death penalty, and would therefore like to make the following recommendations. 1. Introduce a moratorium on the death penalty, including for juvenile offenders with a view towards abolition. 2. To eliminate in law and in practice all forms of systematic discrimination against women and girls in public and private life to ensure women's equal participation in society. And 3, to uphold and respect the prohibition against arbitrary arrest and detentions as expressed in Article 9 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and to release all arbitrarily detained individuals. I thank you.
Thank you. Je donne la parole à la distinguée représentante.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland. President, Switzerland welcomes the delegation from Iran and offers the following recommendations. 1. To reduce the number of crimes punishable by the death penalty and establish a moratorium on its use for minors at the time of the crimes, as well as drug-related crimes in line with international obligations of Iran. 2. Disband the immorality police and put an end to restrictions on women and girls in the enjoyment of their human rights. 3. Apply the Nelson Mandela law and ensure rights of all persons detained, and to ensure that people can be defended by a lawyer of their choice and they are informed about the charges against them. 4. Take the necessary measures to defeat discriminations against ethnic and religious minorities. Remedy socioeconomic inequalities in the provinces mostly populated by these minorities. Thank you.
Tajikistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tajikistan warmly welcome the distinguished delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the presentation of the comprehensive national report and continue engagement in the UPR process. We welcome the national report of Iran on the implementation of the recommendations that indicate the willingness of the country to cooperate, as well as the progress of the country in the human rights area. In a constructive spirit, Tajikistan presents following recommendations. 1. To continue constructive cooperation with the United Nations Human Rights Mechanism. 2. Continue the implementation of national plans and policies that are designated to promote and protect human rights in the country. And 3. Continue to bring its national legislation into line with the international human rights instrument. We wish the delegation of Iran a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Thailand.
Mr. President, Thailand commends Iran for its efforts to promote equal access to education for women, bridging the gap between women and men in the enrollment in schools. Furthermore, Thailand welcomes the development of training courses on human rights by the government for judges and administrative staff. Thailand recommends that Iran, first, continue its deliberation in becoming a party to the Convention Against Torture. Second, continue its efforts in promoting women's participation in different sectors of society, especially in public services. Third, take further measures to uphold the rights of the child in the criminal justice system, taking into account the best interests of the child. Fourth, further strengthen human rights education, especially for judicial and law enforcement officials. We wish Iran a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. Je passe la parole au distingué représentative.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Togo. Togo appears to be absent.
Representative of Tunisia by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to welcome the honorable delegation of Iran, and we thank them for the national report. We commend the efforts by the Iranian government to implement the previous UPR recommendations and to promote human rights system. We welcome the legislative and operational measures adopted recently, namely in terms of protection of children and adolescents, women and family, poverty reduction, and supporting health, education and employment, as well as improving prisons conditions. In a positive interactive spirit, we recommend the following. First, to pursue efforts to secure equal education rights to all. Second, to pursue efforts to promote children's rights and protection. And third, to pursue efforts to establish the National Human Rights Institution in line with Paris principles. Finally, we wish the Iranian delegation success in this UPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkmenistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Turkmenistan welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran and express gratitude for the detailed presentation of its national report. While positively noting the significant progress made by the government of Iran in implementing the recommendations received during the previous UPR cycle, as well as the various measures taken to strengthening the constitutional, legislative and institutional framework for the promotion and protection of human rights, Turkmenistan would like to submit the following recommendations. First, continue further engagement with human rights mechanisms, including the special procedures of the UN. Two, pursue efforts aimed at improving the legal system and creating the necessary conditions to ensure and promote the rights of women and girls, children, persons with disabilities, and the elderly. In conclusion, Turkmenistan wishes the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran a successful UPR review. Muvaffaq olsun.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the brotherly delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran and congratulate them for a comprehensive report. We specifically commend the government of Iran for her continued generosity in hosting large numbers of refugees amid its declining international support. We also applaud the government of Iran for the milestones made towards championing the right to development amid its several restrictions they continue to face. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Uganda would like to make 3 recommendations. 1, continue to implement the generous refugee policies that guarantee enjoyment of rights of refugees as enshrined in the 1950 Convention. 2, continue to promote the right to development by adopting strategies that empower women through equitable access to education, healthcare, and social protection. And 3, continue to implement policies that protect girls and boys, including their participation in the political and public decision-making. We wish our brothers and sisters of Iran a very successful review. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. As long as Iran chooses to support Russia in its brutal armed aggression against Ukraine, as long as Iranian drones and missiles continue to kill innocent civilians and destroy civilian infrastructure in blatant violation of international humanitarian and human rights law, Iran bears full responsibility for enabling Russia's war crimes in Ukraine. Ukraine urges Iran to uphold its international obligations and provides the following recommendations. Accept all outstanding visit requests of the UN special procedures without any hindrance or restrictions on durations or scope. Cooperate fully with the fact-finding mission. Adjust national legislation in line with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in order to ensure the enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons regardless of religion and ethnicity. Issue an immediate moratorium on the use of the death penalty, especially for juveniles. Urgently advance women's rights by repealing discriminatory laws, combating gender-based violence, and guaranteeing equal opportunities in education and employment.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
The United Kingdom welcomes Iran's engagement with the UPR. We have noted President Pezeshkian's election campaign comments on human rights issues, including the negative implications of hijab enforcement and internet filtering. We remain deeply concerned about Iran's failure to uphold its international legal obligations, in particular its violent enforcement of mandatory veiling, intimidation of human rights defenders and journalists, and discrimination against minority groups. We recommend that Iran, 1, guarantees all individuals, but especially those facing charges carrying the death penalty, a fair trial consistent with obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, including access to a lawyer of their choosing. 2, grants access to Human Rights Council mandate holders, including the Special Rapporteur on Iran. 3. Ratifies the UN Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Republic of Tanzania by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United Republic of Tanzania welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the review session. We commend the progress made in the promotion and protection of human rights by, among other things, providing human rights education. We further commend Iran for the measures taken to increase the rate of enrollment of female students in schools and for reducing risks of natural disasters. We also note the positive development in the health sector. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we recommend the following for consideration. 1. To take further measures to reduce the mortality rate of children less than 5 years. And 2. To continue with efforts to ensure access to water, especially in rural areas. The United Republic of Tanzania wishes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran a successful review session. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. Uruguay welcomes the delegation of Iran and we thank them for the presentation of the report. We commend the efforts made regarding the possibility of acceding to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane, degrading treatment and punishment, and we urge ratification. We constructively recommend 1. Abolish death penalty, especially for minors, 2. Repeal discriminatory laws and policies against women and guarantee their fundamental rights. 3. Guarantee the right to freedom of expression, in particular of human rights defenders and journalists, men and women. 4. Guarantee unrestricted access for the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran and other UN human rights mechanisms. Finally, Uruguay wishes Iran success during this review cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uzbekistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Uzbekistan warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Iran and thanks for the presentation of national report. We know the efforts of Iran in the field of protection and promotion of human rights, including the measures taken for the practical implementation of recommendations adopted following the previous UPR reviews. We also know with appreciation the measures taken to ensure there's access to the healthcare system, especially for vulnerable groups. Uzbekistan makes the following recommendations. 1. Strengthen further efforts to promote the rights of persons with disabilities. 2. Continue effective implementation of national action plans to improve the well-being of vulnerable groups living in rural areas and their access to education. 3. Continue further steps towards the ratification of Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. We wish the delegation of Iran every success in its review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Vietnam warmly welcomes the delegation of Iran. We commend Iran's progress in advancing human rights through legislative measures, such as the law on the protection of children and adolescents and the 7th Development Plan law, which underscore its commitment to safeguarding fundamental rights. We also acknowledge Iran's incorporation of human rights education into the national curriculum, a commendable step in fostering awareness and respect for human rights across society. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend to Iran, 1. Integrate the right to development in national policies and implement measures that ensure all Iranians can participate in and benefit from national development efforts. 2. Invest in renewable energy sources to combat environmental degradation and reduce dependencies on non-renewable resources. We wish Iran continued success in its UPR process. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Zimbabwe welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the comprehensive national report. We commend the important steps that the country has taken towards upholding its human rights commitments, as well as its dedication to improving human rights, despite the unjustified and illegal unilateral coercive measures imposed on Iran. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we make 3 recommendations. 1, continue its efforts on improving the legal and institutional framework to ensure protection of human rights and access to justice by its citizens. 2, stay focused on addressing issues related to the rights of women, children, and vulnerable communities. And 3, continue working towards promoting development through access to education, healthcare, and social protection. We wish Iran a successful review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Merci. À ce stade, je redonne la parole.
Thank you. And now I would like to give the floor back to the delegation so that they can respond to the recommendations and comments formulated up until now. You have the floor.
Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to the Deputy Chief Justice of the Islamic Republic of Iran to talk about the achievements made in the judicial system.
In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to inform you that during the last 4 years, significant normative developments have been implemented based on the emerging needs of individuals and society, in line with human rights standards, the preservation of human dignity, and addressing legal and judicial gaps. In this regard, I would like to highlight some of these achievements. Revision, adoption, and implementation of the executive regulation of the prison organization and security and correctional measures of the country in line with human rights commitments and adherence to international standards, including the Nelson Mandela rules, introducing significant safeguards to better ensuring of the rights of prisoners, drafting and issuance of the judicial transformation, an excellence document in March 2024 aimed at addressing challenges within the judicial system, including delays in proceedings, the drafting and issuance of the judicial security document in October 2020 aimed at ensuring judicial security for citizens and preventing the violation of their fundamental rights, the revision and adoption of the Dispute Resolution Councils Act, and the recent establishment of peace courts nationwide to strengthen mediation institutions. Notably, 42% of cases entering the judiciary are resolved through reconciliation and settlement. The adoption of guidelines on support for the rights of persons with disabilities and the elderly in the judicial process in line with obligations under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to enhance judicial fairness for these groups. The issuance of a directive on the clarification of detainees' rights, the preservation of their dignity, and the supervision of detention centers in accordance with the Nelson Mandela rules. The adoption of instructions for organizing and expediting international judicial affairs, which include paying greater attention to the rights of foreign nationals in fair trials. Regarding facilitating access to judicial services, reducing in-person visits, preserving the dignity of applicants, exchanging transparency, and expediting judicial proceedings, significant measures have been taken as follows. Developing and expanding multiple intelligence systems to facilitate access to justice, equipping all prisons nationwide with electronic courtrooms. Currently, approximately 76% of prisoner trials are conducted electronically, which has increased the speed of proceedings and ensured the dignity of prisoners. Additionally, several supportive measures have been taken to establish judicial fairness, including establishing the 129 system to provide free legal consultation and assistance, setting up judicial support offices for children and women in all judicial complexes across the country, offering free electronic judicial services in 1,700 locations nationwide, particularly in underdeveloped areas, conducting provincial visits by the Chief Justice and the High Judicial Council to oversee judicial proceedings and meet public requests. Over the past 18 months, 11,000 public petitions have been addressed during these visits. Establishing judiciary services desk in mosques and public places to receive and address public requests by judicial officials. In guaranteeing the rights of detainees, in addition to the procedural guarantees of the criminal procedure, Code adopted in February 2014, the Law on Respect for Legitimate Freedoms and Protection of Citizens' Rights of 23, and the Executive Regulation of the Prison Organization, oversight bodies such as prosecutors and the Secretariat for the Protection of Citizens' Rights have conducted regular and unexpected inspections of detention centers and prisoners. Over the past 21 months, more than 25,000 inspections of prisons and detention centers have been carried out. Moreover, nearly 98 leaves of absence have been granted. Jobs have been provided for over 43,000 inmates, and vocational training has been delivered to more than 111,000 prisoners. During the COVID-19 pandemic, priority was given to granting leave for elderly prisoners, pregnant and nursing women, drafting specific protocols for prisoners, and conducting necessary vaccinations. I would also like to draw your attention to the advanced judicial mechanism of pardon and release in Iran's legal system, rooted in humane approaches and Islamic compassion. Based on this structure, a significant number of criminal convicts, including those sentenced to death, security-related offenders and others, are pardoned and released annually on 14 national religious occasions. In this regard, over the past 21 months, nearly 6,000 individuals have been pardoned and released. The sentences of approximately 10,000 convicts have been reduced, and the execution of about 1,000 qisas retribution sentences has been prevented due to efforts to gain the consent of victims' families. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I would now like to ask Her Excellency Dr. Fatemi, the Deputy Director for Women and Family Affairs of the Office of the President, to have her address. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that women, as half of the society's human, intellectual and specialized capital, play a key role in the growth and development of society and the achievement of sustainable development. In this regard, the general policies of the 7th Development Plan, approved in 2022, stipulate in paragraph 15 the removal of obstacles to the growth and flourishing of women. Chapter 16 of this plan is specifically dedicated to the development of women's rights. At the level of development laws and in the realm of implementation and action, all substantive laws, guidelines, and executive regulations are obliged to comply with this law. In light of proportionate political and legal support and the targeted implementation of the 3rd round of recommendations, Iranian women have been able to pursue a path of growth and prosperity despite inhumane and oppressive sanctions. I would like to highlight the most significant developments in this period. Reducing gender gap in women's education between the ages of 10 and 49 to 3%. Increasing the share of women in university students to over 52%, and increasing the key presence of women in the fields of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, information and communications. Increasing the presence of women as faculty members of universities to 33%. In the field of health, increasing the life expectancy index among Iranian women to 78 years, and reducing the maternity mortality rate to 20 cases per 100,000 live births. Insurance coverage for infertility treatment services and insurance coverage for prenatal care and health services for women and newborns. Increasing the presence of women in the country's health and medical staff to more than 50%. Currently, women make up 40% of the specialist physician staff and 30% of the subspecialist physicians. In the field of employment, allocating 41% of the 2.6 million jobs created and 30% of the licenses for all occupations and 80% of the licenses for home-based businesses to women. Training 300,000 rural and nomadic women annually through a plan to promote entrepreneurship and sustainable business development. Creating a guarantee fund in the field of employment for women heads of households in the 1st to 5th economic deciles. Supporting the establishment of 250 knowledge-based companies by women. More than 4,000 companies out of the country's 10,000 knowledge-based companies are managed by women or have women on their board of directors. the operation of 8.2 nascent women entrepreneurs for every 10 nascent male entrepreneurs. The activities of women entrepreneurs in new and innovative technologies. For example, the presence of 4 Iranian women entrepreneurs among the 26 top entrepreneurs from BRICS member countries in 2024 in the fields of creative industries, inclusive economy, national currencies, and tourism. Increasing the number and diversity of fields of activity from 150 fields to 400 fields of activity in the last 5 years. Distinguished participants, I would like to point out that with the measures thus far taken, women constitute approximately 45% of those employed in the public sector and more than 74% of those employed in the private sector. In the field of employers, more than 32,000 women employers are active in the private sector. Women also make up more than 31% of those active in the field of information technology and 24% of the managers of strategic technology laboratories in the country. In recent years, the Islamic Republic of Iran has taken long strides in facilitating the presence of women in key government and management positions based on merit, and in this regard, we are witnessing significant developments, including doubling the appointment of women to managerial positions from more than 19,000 in 2020 to more than 40,000 in 2023. The appointment of women as ministers, vice presidents, government spokespersons, and senior officials to more than 70 people. The appointment of 1,006 women as judges and 13 as deputy prosecutors. Increasing the presence of women in managerial positions at the level of governorates from 2022 to more than 3,000 people throughout the country. And the recent order of the President to employ qualified women in appropriate management levels in the country's governorates. Dear distinguished guests, strengthening the institution of the family as the main foundation of society has always been a priority of the Islamic Republic of Iran's programs. Therefore, the generalities of the bill so named as Preventing Harm to Women and Promoting Their Safety Against Abuse have been approved by the Parliament, and legal and support assistance is provided by special officers for the protection of women and children in all judicial complexes. In conclusion, I would like to underscore that these achievements not only demonstrate the capabilities of Iranian women, but also mirror systematic and continuous efforts to create equal opportunities for the presence of women in all fields in order for them to achieve sustainable development. It is important to note that creating equal and fair opportunities for women requires a real understanding of the social and economic conditions, cultural context, values, and national beliefs of each given country, and the cultural diversity of countries in the category of human rights must be considered and respected. Thank you for your attention. I would like to ask Dr. Zaini Vand, the Honorable Deputy Minister of Interior, for his address. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in a tense region embroiled in war and crisis, the Islamic Republic of Iran has created a pioneering and innovative model of a free and inclusive electoral system that provides citizens with the right to active, universal, and non-discriminatory participation in the regulation and direction of the country's policies in all political, economic, cultural, and international dimensions. Holding 42 elections in the 46-year history of the Islamic Revolution shows that the political participation of citizens has a high position in the Islamic Republic of Iran. In this regard, holding 6 rounds of elections, including presidential, parliamentary, city council, village council, assembly of experts, since the 3rd round of implementation of UPR recommendations, as well as the approval of the comprehensive election law bill in the cabinet of ministers with the aim to clarify and guarantee the rights of voters and candidates are worth mentioning. The Islamic Republic of Iran has tried to provide a proper, apt environment for the presence and participation of parties, associations, and societies. In this regard, I would like to mention some of these measures. Issuance of 480 licenses for trade and professional organizations. Operation of more than 30,000 non-governmental organizations throughout the country, and issuance of more than 2,500 NGO activity permits in the last 4 years. Activity of 145 political parties in the country. Activity of more than 14,000 labor and employer organizations by the Ministry of Cooperatives, Labor and Social Welfare. Establishment of a specialized desk for NGOs in the Human Rights Council of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Justice, submitting a bill on how to hold gatherings and marches to the Parliament for approval. It is worth noting that the right to peaceful assembly as a symbol of political and public participation is recognized and supported in the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran as well as other laws. Protests, gatherings, and trade union and social issues are held spontaneously in a self-motivated manner. And in most of these cases, while ensuring security and the opportunity to protest, officials respond by attending among the protesters. In the recent period, hundreds of peaceful trade union gatherings have been held throughout the country. I should like to advise that followers of the Sunni school of thought in Iran have equal rights to participate in political, social, and administrative affairs, and a significant number of them are in fact employed in executive bodies as administrative staff and managers. In the recent elections of the Assembly of Experts of the leadership, 5 representatives, and in the 12th round of elections of the Islamic Consultative Assembly, aka Islamic Parliament of the Islamic Republic of Iran, 22 representatives from the Sunni community entered the parliament. In the new government, 2 of the governors of the provinces, where the majority of the people are from ethnicities, have been selected from the Sunni compatriots. And in addition, one of the vice presidents of Mr. Pezeshkian has also been appointed from among the Sunni citizens. In the same vein, one can mention 146 mayors, more than 200 governors, district governors and deputy governors, as well as 788 council members and thousands of village council members from the Sunni community in different regions of the country, as well as the appointment of the commander of the naval force of the army from Sunni compatriots. In this regard, some other notable statistics are as follows. Activity of 17,266 Sunni mosques, 342 seminaries, 302 media, more than 1,000 faculty members from the Sunni community. Despite some economic challenges that the Islamic Republic of Iran has faced due to unilateral coercive sanctions, it has been hosting millions of refugees with generosity and philanthropy for more than 4 decades, and has tried to benefit from the necessary services, for them to benefit from the necessary services in various fields. These services go beyond what is foreseen in the Convention on the Status of Refugees of 1951, and some of these services are briefly mentioned as below. Hosting nearly 6 million people in the country. However, unofficial statistics indicate the presence of more than this, which is estimated to be between 7 and 8 million people, mostly illegal. Providing access to free education for students of foreign nationals. During more than 3,350,000 students have been provided with educational services, providing health services in 105 centers with public funding in guest cities and cities with foreign national populations. Job empowerment of foreign nationals by providing technical and vocational training. Issuance or renewal of about 900,000 work permits in 4 years. Job empowerment of foreign nationals by providing launching an electronic employment system for foreign nationals for quick and easy response. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for this presentation. I would like to invite Mr. Charlie Envier-Tequier, the representative of the minorities of Kalimi and Ashuri in Iran and a member of Parliament of the Islamic Republic of Iran who will be talking about the achievements in this field. The floor is yours.
In the name of God. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as a representative of the Syrian and Chaldean Christians in the Iranian parliament, I serve my country not only as a member of parliament, but also in a prominent position as a supervisory representative in the Supreme Council of Architecture and Urban Planning. To achieve this post, 285 Muslim representatives placed their trust in me, a Christian, through the votes. I have now been serving in this position for the 5th consecutive year. One of the hallmarks of Iran's cultural and social diversity is the presence of various ethnic groups and religious minorities, which exemplifies national solidarity, unity, and cohesion. In Iran, everyone enjoys equal rights and access to resources. In some cases, positive discrimination is implemented to address the specific needs of religious minorities. The following are key measures taken in the domain of religious minority rights. In June 2024, an amendment to Article 24 of the regulations on non-governmental organizations mandated the Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance to support artistic, media, and religious activities of minorities across the country. Enhancement of the law, adding 2 articles to the Islamic Penal Code criminalizing violence and hate speech against Iranian ethnicities, divine religions, or Islamic sects. The free operation of approximately 300 churches, 16 synagogues, and about 78 Zoroastrian temples, with the restoration of 40 churches supported financially by the Cultural Heritage and Tourism Organization. Tax exemptions and special discounts on utility bills for religious places of worship, including synagogues, churches, and fire temples. Allocation of special budgets, such as funds provided by the Ministry of Interior to religious minority associations as positive discrimination. These funds have annually increased by 100%, amounting to a total of $2.5 million USD between 2020 and 2024. Organization of 376 gatherings, including religious ceremonies, in which national officials such as the Supreme Leader, heads of the 3 branches of government, and other authorities participated to congratulate religious minorities on the celebrations. Special efforts have been made to honor the martyrs of religious minorities. For example, last year, a large-scale funeral ceremony was held for martyr Johnny Bet Oshana, a martyr of the Iran-Iraq War, attended by high-ranking officials and the public. Of issuance of 69 activity permits and working permits for foreign religious representatives, including cardinals, bishops, and priests in Iran. Operation of 56 associations, 28 for Zoroastrians, 15 for Armenians, 10 for Assyrians, and 3 for Jews, addressing religious, cultural, social, and welfare issues specific to religious minorities. Religious minorities use dedicated publications to raise awareness within their communities. Publication of 157 book titles by publishers belonging to religious minorities. Operation of 5 schools for Jewish students, 38 for Zoroastrians, and 50 for Assyrians and Armenian Christians, offering education tailored to their native languages. Functioning of media institutions such as Alik, Arax, and Payman for Armenians, and Rosh Assyrian, and Payam Assyrian for Assyrian Christians. Establishment of 9 specialized branches of dispute resolution councils dedicated to addressing personal status cases of religious minorities. A special branch for Zoroastrian cases was created in 2023 at the Tehran Zoroastrian Association. Regarding employment and related rights, I would like to emphasize that the religious minority community has been active in major investment projects in Iran. Minority investors are involved in various economic sectors, including livestock and poultry feed production, bitumen, refineries, food and meat processing plants, international transportation companies, knowledge-based entrepreneurial firms, clothing manufacturing companies, insurance investment firms, a large import-export business. in fields such as mobile phones, textiles, wooden products, and household appliances. They are also engaged in major contracting projects in construction infrastructure. These activities have been supported by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Thank you for your attention.
Merci. Nous continuons à présent avec...
Thank you. We will now pursue our interactive dialogue, and I would like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Afghanistan.
Afghanistan warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran and thanks them for their detailed presentation. خوش آمدید. While appreciating Iran's generous hospitality to millions of refugees from Afghanistan for decades, the situation under the Taliban remains of utmost concern. We urge Iran to continue its efforts in providing protection and support to refugees, particularly those who fled the country following the Taliban's military takeover in August 2021. Mr. President, in the spirit of constructive engagement, my delegation wishes to make the following recommendations. Ensure that all refugees within the territory of the Islamic Republic of Iran are granted their basic human rights and are protected from forced expulsion. Intensify efforts to enhance the protection of human rights of refugees within the territory, with a particular focus on ensuring their access to essential services, such as health care and education. Finally, we wish Iran every success in the implementation of accepted recommendations. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Albania.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, President. We remain extremely concerned at Iranian authorities' continuing failure to respect Iranians' human rights. The national report presented today, though, would contradict our view that there continue to be human rights violations committed. Our recommendations: release all persons under arbitrary detention; 2, stop persecution and discrimination against ethnic and religious minorities, including the Baha'is; 3, stop violence against women and girls; 4, stop using torture; 5, end impunity; 6, ensure an independent, fair and equitable judicial system; 7, fully cooperate with human rights mechanisms; 8, abolish the death penalty; 9, ratify CEDAW; and 10, ratify the CAT. I now call on Algeria. Thank you, President. First of all, I'd like to welcome the Iranian delegation led by the Deputy Minister for Judicial Affairs. We'd like to thank the delegation for the report, and we commend Iran's efforts to promote human rights, particularly by strengthening social protection and improving education, medical care, and we also welcome the adoption of the 7th Development Plan in April last year and efforts to finalise the creation of the High Council for Human Rights. Our recommendations: 1, pursue efforts to provide high-quality health and education services in rural areas; 2, pursue efforts to benefit persons with disabilities and make sure they have access to social protection. By way of conclusion, we wish Iran every success in implementing accepted recommendations. I thank you. Thank you, President. With regard to the report presented by Iran, we recommend eradicating child labour and repeal any measures which are an attack on girls, access to education, and eradicate systemic discrimination against women, eradicate violence against them, and put a stop to early forced and child marriage, ratify international human rights instruments, ratify the main treaties such as CAT and the Convention Against Enforced Disappearance. Also extradite the people who are wanted by Interpol for having placed bombs in the Israeli embassy in Argentina. we must make sure that the human rights of the dead are also respected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Armenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Armenia welcomes the delegation of Iran and thanks for presentation of its national report. Armenia commends the efforts of Iran in hosting large number of refugees and ensuring protection of their rights. We welcome the normative and institutional framework aimed at promotion and protection of human rights undertaken since the previous cycle of the UPR, in particular the adoption of the 7th Development Plan law. Armenia highly values the efforts in building and facilitating interfaith dialogue between religious minorities and particularly appreciate the preservation and protection of the Armenian Christian monuments on territory of Iran, including UNESCO-listed Armenian churches. We recommend 1. To continue initiatives in promoting dialogue, cooperation and tolerance between different cultures and religions. 2. To promote inclusive education, especially in rural and disadvantaged areas, including for those with disabilities and refugees. We wish Iran every success for its current review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, President. Australia thanks the delegation of Iran for their presentation. While Australia acknowledges the participation of women and girls in formal education, we remain deeply concerned by ongoing and systematic violations of their rights. Australia is alarmed by Iran's increased application of the death penalty. Australia recommends Iran, 1, immediately repeal all laws that violate the rights of women and girls to participate in public life and be treated with dignity. 2, establish a formal moratorium on the death penalty and immediately ban the death penalty for minors. 3, ensure fully transparent and comprehensive investigations of human rights violations during the 2022 protests and hold those found responsible to account. 4, guarantee the rights to freedom of expression, association and assembly in accordance with its obligations under the ICCPR. And 5, cooperate with UN human rights mechanisms and invite the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran to conduct a country visit. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Austria welcomes the delegation of Iran to the UPR and thanks them for their presentation. We would like to offer Iran the following recommendations. 1, respect the right to life and therefore ensure that the death penalty is not imposed and, as a first step, establish an official moratorium. 2, ensure that the equal treatment of women and girls in law and practice and ratify CEDAW. 3, bring the Iranian constitution in line with international human rights law and ensure that all religious minorities, including the Baha'i, are recognized and can fully enjoy the right to freedom of religion or belief. 4, ensure the prohibition of torture and ratify CAT. 5, ensure the prison conditions comply with the Nelson Mandela rules. 6, end intimidation and harassment of human rights defenders, journalists, bloggers, media and artists, and ensure safe conditions for all to exercise the right to freedom of expression. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahrain.
السيد الرئيس اطلع وفد بلاد.
Thank you, President. My delegation has taken note of the 4th report submitted by the Islamic Republic of Iran. We commend Iran on measures taken to improve the human rights situation in the country. In a constructive spirit, we have the following recommendations. 1, take more effective measures to accede to international human rights instruments and respect international commitments linked to ratified instruments, and 2, pursue efforts to combat human trafficking, and 3, enable those working in human rights to benefit from best standards, and 4, cooperate in combating climate change. We wish you every success in the review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh by video.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Bangladesh welcomes the distinguished delegation of Iran to its 4th cycle of UPR. We take note of the efforts made by the government of Iran to implement the recommendations of its last UPR cycle. We also note that Iran has recently enacted a law on the protection of children and adolescents and adopted the 7th Development Plan law. In a spirit of cooperation, Bangladesh recommends the following. First, further intensify efforts to ensure access for all to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Second, continue efforts to strengthen child protection mechanisms and implement the newly enacted law to protect children and adolescents. Third, ensure the capacity of the civil societies to protect and promote the rights of immigrants, refugees and asylum seekers. And finally, expand cooperation with international mechanisms on counter-narcotics. We wish Iran success in its review. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Thank you. We hail the delegation of Iran and we note progress achieved in legislation and shoring up the institutional framework for protecting human rights. We positively note the improvement of the situations despite external sanctions pressure. In the spirit of cooperation, we recommend ensuring full implementation of the Convention of the with disabilities, implementing a program to support children with disabilities, protecting them from all forms of cruel and inhumane treatment. Second, to implement measures to prevent UCMs and their negative impact on human rights. We wish them an excellent UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. Je passe la parole.
I now call on the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Belgium welcomes Iran's delegation. We remain deeply concerned about the human rights situation and particularly the extensive use of the death penalty and the deep-rooted discrimination against women and girls. Belgium recommends Iran to, first, adopt a moratorium on executions with a view to abolishing the death penalty, at least for crimes committed by persons under 18, in accordance with Iran's obligation under the ICCPR and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Second, repeal, amend or refrain from implementing all laws, regulations and procedures discriminating directly against women and girls, including mandatory dress codes, and take measures to ensure equality between women and men in law and practice. Third, ensure that the constitutional and legislative order guarantees the enjoyment of all human rights on equal basis to all religious minorities, including Baha'is, Christians, Jews and Muslims of every denomination on an equal basis. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Thank you. Mr. President, Brazil welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We recognize Iran's efforts to ensure internet access in the country's schools, enhancing education opportunities and bridging the digital divide. Brazil also commends the Iranian government for positive results in primary health, with decline in maternal and infant mortality rates. In a constructive spirit, Brazil recommends Iran, 1. To take concrete measures to increase women's representation in decision-making positions, ensure equal opportunities in public affairs, and strengthen women's political and economic participation. And 2, to put in place a moratorium on the use of the death penalty with a view to its abolition. Brazil remains concerned by reports of HR violations against women, HR defenders, and religious and ethnic minorities, including Baha'is. Brazil wishes Iran a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brunei Darussalam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brunei Darussalam warmly welcomes the delegation of Iran to Geneva and thanks them for the updates provided since their last review. In particular, we recognize the progress made in the health sector through Iran's healthcare network system, which has been able to attain high coverage for people both in urban and rural areas. In addition, we propose 2 recommendations. 1, continue to take measures towards a comprehensive approach to disaster management, and 2, further strengthen initiatives to achieve literacy for all, including access to quality education from a young age. Mr. President, Brunei Darussalam wishes Iran a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. Je donne la parole à la distinguée.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Burkina Faso. Thank you, President. My delegation wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we congratulate them for the presentation of the national report at this 4th UPR cycle. We commend the efforts and progress made in promoting and protecting human rights in Iran, especially measures adopted for the benefit of women, the adoption of the law on the 7th Development Plan, approval of the law and transparency of the 3 powers of the executive bodies and other institutions, respectively in April and May 2024. In a constructive spirit, we make the following recommendations. 1. Continue efforts to further bolster resilience of populations against the harmful impacts of UCMs, to continue efforts for the sustainable provision of healthcare products of vital importance and medical equipment for the treatment of rare diseases. We wish Iran a successful UPR. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole au distingué.
Thank you. I give the floor to Burundi. Microphone for the speaker, please. Burundi welcomes Iran. We wish them success in this UPR. We applaud the efforts. Thank you, President. Burundi warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Iran, and we wish them every success in this UPR. We applaud the efforts made to provide all children access to official education, teaching in the country, and above all, achieving equality at primary and secondary levels. My delegation notes with satisfaction that the maximum coverage to the healthcare services network has been registered and that special attention is given to mother and child with a view to preventing maternal and infant mortality. We also encourage initiatives to promote employment for women, the creation of businesses for their benefit, as well as their representation in decision-making posts. My delegation would make the 2 recommendations in a constructive spirit. 1, continue literacy programs for all and for the benefit of the nomad community and in rural areas. And 2, continue efforts for the protection of vulnerable groups, such as the elderly or persons with disabilities.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Cambodia warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Islamic Republic of Iran and highly appreciate the comprehensive national report presented. Cambodia recognizes Iran's engagement with the UPR mechanism and its efforts to implement accepted recommendations demonstrate a commitment to improving human rights. We also applaud Iran's ongoing commitments to enhance social and economic development, particularly on women empowerment, children and women's rights through its national initiatives and policies. In the constructive spirit, Cambodia would like to make the following recommendations. 1, continue implementing its national policy, particularly with regards to the social protection programs that support women, children, and minority rights. And 2, continue strengthening its cooperations and national policy to empower rural women and enhance their economic and social role in the countries. Lastly, Cambodia wishes Iran a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Thank you, President. Canada is profoundly concerned by the escalation of human rights violations in Iran, especially the increasing use of the death penalty. Canada recommends that Iran, 1, abolish the death penalty, 2, ratify the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and repeal all laws violating the rights of women and girls, including those that impose mandatory wearing of the veil. 3, repeal all laws and practices discriminatory towards ethnic and religious minorities, including Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, Baha'i, Ahwazi, Arabs, Baluchis, Kurds, and Sunni Muslims, among others. Canada urges Iran to adopt accountability measures reflected in international law and to cooperate fully with the International Fact-Finding Mission and with the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Iran. Thank you.
The distinguished representative of Chile.
Thank you, President. We'd like to congratulate Iran for their support to Afghan refugees who have come to their territory. Chile respectfully recommends 1, ratify the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, Degrading Treatment and Punishment, and the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 2. Reduce the number of crimes punishable by death and encourage a public debate on a moratorium. 3. Carry out exhaustive, impartial, transparent investigations into the deaths of protesters during the protests of 2022 and 23. 4. Criminalise marital and domestic violence. Marital rape and domestic violence. 5. Repeal all legislation that creates discrimination and persecution of persons on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity or gender expression. We wish Iran every success in this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
China welcomes Iran's participation in this UPR. We commend its progress in the promotion and protection of human rights, including its promotion of sustainable economic and social development, increasing investment in education, health, and other public sectors, enhancing social protection, and actively coping with natural disasters or protecting the rights of special interest groups such as women, children, persons with disabilities, and elderly, and cooperating with international human rights bodies. We'd like to make 2 recommendations to Iran. First, continue to promote sustainable economic and social development as a firm foundation for better enjoyment of human rights. Secondly, continue to take measures to mitigate the negative impact of UCM on the human rights of Iran people, including enhancing cooperation with the Council's Special Rapporteur on UCM. China wishes Iran every success in this review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia by video.
Welcome to the distinguished delegation of Iran. In constructive spirit, we recommend 1. Accede to the Convention on Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, Convention against torture and other cruel, inhumane, degrading treatment or punishment, and the Convention on Protection of all persons from enforced disappearance. 2. Abolish sentences of amputation, imprisonment for failure to comply with contractual obligations, and declare a moratorium on the death penalty. 3. Facilitate a visit by the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights to Iran. 4. Ensure that human rights defenders and their family members aren't made victims of intimidation or arbitrary sanction. 5. Set the legal age of marriage at 18 years. 6. Ensure that the children of Iranian mothers married to undocumented migrants or refugees can automatically acquire citizenship. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au
Thank you. I give the floor to Congo. President, Congo wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. My country commends the bolstering of the legal institutional framework for promotion and protection of human rights in Iran, following implementation of recommendations accepted during the last UPR. We would also note the many initiatives implemented by Iran when it comes to human rights education, supported inter alia by university-level training. As part of continued efforts, my country would encourage Iran to finalize the process of establishing a national human rights institution. In conclusion and in constructive spirit, Congo would make the following recommendations. 1. Redouble efforts to combat dissemination of negative stereotypes towards minority groups and non-nationals. 2. Ratify the ILO Convention 189 on domestic workers. Thank you.
Merci. Je passe la parole au distingué.
I give the floor to Costa Rica. Thank you. My country thanks Iran for the report, and it continues to be concerned by the alarming increase in executions and application of death penalty, including of minors. Costa Rica recommends 1. Adopt all necessary measures to end intimidation and arbitrary detention, criminal attacks, stigmatization and killings of human rights defenders, especially of female HRDs. 2, guarantee fully the right to freedom of expression, assembly and peaceful assembly, providing a safe, conducive environment for its exercise, especially for female human rights defenders. 3, reform the judicial system, substituting clerics for judges and advocates and lawyers who are duly trained to implement law in line with international human rights standards. 3, end torture during detention, including with a view to extracting confessions. 5, eliminate all discrimination against religious and ethnic minorities, including Bahis, Ahwazi, Arabs and Christians, and guarantee respect for cultural and religious rights and freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Croatia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Croatia welcomes Iran's engagement in the UPR process and thanks them for the presentation of their report. We remain deeply worried about the human rights situation in the country, especially regarding sharp rise in executions after the 2022 protests. We offer, therefore, 3 recommendations. 1, immediately impose a moratorium on the use of death penalty with a view to its complete abolition. 2, amend relevant articles from the Penal Code in order to abolish all forms of corporal punishment and replace them with other forms of punishment that would facilitate rehabilitation of convicted individuals. 3, release all detained civil society members and provide human rights defenders and journalists a safe and secure environment to carry out their work. Croatia wishes Iran a successful review session. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Gracias.
Thank you, President. We'd like to welcome cordially the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We thank them for their commitment to the UPR as an instrument of respectful cooperation and exchange. We highlight the progress made by the country when it comes to human rights as reflected in the national report. In a constructive spirit, we recommend 1, continue developing strategies that guarantee full implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. As 2, guarantee effective implementation of the law and protection of children and adolescents through necessary training to all beneficiaries and stakeholders. 3, continue efforts to make cyberspace safe for children and teenagers, take into account human rights obligations. We condemn the imposition of UCMs against Iran with a view to impeding its progress and limiting its access to financial resources, investment and supplies, especially to treat illnesses and for the exercise of the right to health. We wish every success to the Islamic Republic of Iran in implementing the recommendations agreed to in this cycle of the UPR. Thank you.
The floor to the distinguished representative of Cyprus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Cyprus welcomes delegation from Iran and thanks them for their presentation. Cyprus recommends that Iran, 1, ratifies the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, as well as the Convention against torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. 2, fully cooperates with the UN Human Rights Mechanism. 3, ensures the prevention of discrimination, violence, harassment and ill treatment directed towards women and girls for exercising their fundamental rights. 4, establishes a moratorium on the application of the death penalty. 5, ensures the implementation of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, especially with regards to juvenile offenders, political dissidents and members of the LGBT community. We wish Iran every success in its review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Czechia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Czechia thanks Iran for submitting its national report and makes the following recommendations. 1, establish a moratorium on executions, abolish the death penalty at least for juvenile offenders and drug-related crimes. 2, ratify CEDAW and combat discrimination and violence against women and girls, including domestic violence, marital rape and honor killings. Raise the minimum age for marriage. 3, guarantee the right to freedom of association and peaceful assembly. Limit the use of firearms by law enforcement forces during protests. 4, end arbitrary detention, unfair trials and torture of human rights defenders, lawyers and journalists. Release all prisoners of conscience. 5, censorship and shutdowns, lift restrictions on the right to freedom of expression online and offline. And 6, end discrimination against all religious, ethnic and sexual minorities. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The DPRK delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran and thanks for its comprehensive national report. We highly commend the government of Islamic Republic of Iran for its efforts to tangible progress in the promotion and protection of human rights, despite a couple of challenges. In a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. 1, sustain its efforts to draw the attention of the international community to negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights. 2, continue with the legal and constructive the structural amendment to create equal opportunities for women while considering their specific needs and requirements. We wish Islamic Republic of Iran successfully. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Norway welcomes the efforts to secure education and healthcare for Afghan nationals in Iran. However, several human rights concerns remain. Norway recommends that Iran, 1, abolishes discriminatory legal provisions against minorities and women and ratifies CEDAW. 2, abolishes the death penalty and stops planned executions for persons who committed crimes while below the age of 18, and ensures that Iran fully comply with the Convention of the Rights of the Child, ratified by Iran. 3, ceases the censorship of the media, as well as the arbitrary detention and intimidation of journalists and human rights defenders, online and offline. 4, ensures the rights of detainees and prisoners, including timely and adequate medical treatment and preventive measures such as screening. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador.
Señor Presidente.
Thank you, President. Ecuador extends cordial welcome to the delegation of Iran. We're grateful for the report, and we highlight the approval of the law and protection of children and adolescents and recommends 1, accede to the conventional elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. 2, redouble efforts to improve representation of women in public and political life, especially in decision-making posts in the judiciary and in the private sector. 3, repeal normative provisions restricting unduly the rights to freedom of expression, association and assembly. 4, put an end to child marriage, setting the minimum age for marriage at 18. Ecuador wishes Iran success in this UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
Thank you, President. We'd like to welcome the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we thank them for presenting the report in a constructive spirit. We have the following recommendations. 1, consider the legal framework, make it able to guarantee the rights of persons with disabilities, particularly when it comes to the right to health, employment and participation in political life. 2, promote strategies to ensure integration of persons with disabilities in life in society. Finally, we wish every success to the Islamic Republic of Iran in this UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The government of the state of Eritrea warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We congratulate Iran on its success in closing the gender gap in school enrollment, ensuring equal opportunities for both female and male students. We also commend the government of Iran for achieving a 20% increase in the enrollment of students with disabilities and for providing them with tailored services, particularly in rural and underserved areas. The government of the state of Eritrea humbly recommends the following 4 measures. 1, ensure the continued provision of free and compulsory primary education for all. 2, adopt and implement laws, policies, and programs to guarantee non-discriminatory access to education. 3, strengthen the policy of access to inclusive education for children with disabilities at all levels while considering the previous efforts. And 4, expand access to education for rural students and work to lower overall dropout rates across the country. We thank Iran for its valuable participation in the UPR process and extend our sincere well wishes on the outcome of its 4th review cycle. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Estonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Estonia thanks the Islamic Republic of Iran for its engagement with the UPR process. However, we regret Iran's continuing non-cooperation with the UN Independent International Fact-Finding Mission. We are truly concerned about reports on widespread violence against women and girls and further restrictions on civil and political rights. We recommend to 1. Adopt a comprehensive law criminalizing all forms of violence against women and girls, including domestic violence and crimes committed in the name of so-called honor. 2. Amend laws that are used to restrict freedom of expression online and offline and cease internet shutdowns and blocking of social media. 3. Establish a moratorium on death penalty. 4. Cooperate with the UN Special Rapporteur and of fact-finding mission. 5. End discrimination on any grounds, including of religious minorities such as the Baha'is. 6. Ratify CEDAW, Rome Statute, CAT, and its Observation Protocol. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ethiopia warmly welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the 48th session of the UPR Working Group. Ethiopia commends Iran for implementing recommendations from the previous UPR cycles. We also appreciate the adoption of Article 101 of the 6th Five-Year Development Plan, which emphasizes increasing women's participation in decision-making and management as a key indicator of gender justice. In the spirit of constructive engagement and dialogue, Ethiopia recommends to Iran to 1. Continue strengthening the protection and promotion of minority rights by ensuring the full and equal participation in all aspects of political, social, and administrative life. 2. Continue strengthening efforts to promote women's participation in decision-making and management roles and ensure their equal representation at all levels of governance and leadership. Finally, Ethiopia wishes success to the delegation of Iran in its engagement with the UPR Working Group. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Finland.
Mr. President, Finland welcomes the engagement of Iran in the UPR process. Finland remains highly concerned by the overall human rights situation in Iran and recommends Iran to, first, implement its international obligations to ensure the rights to freedom of opinion and expression, assembly and association in compliance with international human rights law, and to ensure that all investigations, prosecutions and trials meet international standards. Second, to abolish discriminatory legislation and create policies and practices to prevent all forms of violence against women and girls, and promptly investigate and prosecute all such cases. Third, to abolish the use of death penalty and immediately establish an official moratorium on executions. We wish Iran a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. Germany welcomes the delegation of Iran. Germany commends small steps of the Iranian government to respect the rights of minorities and the announcement to change the government's policy towards women. However, we await action to be taken. Germany remains deeply concerned about the human rights situation in Iran, particularly the extreme high number of people sentenced to death and subsequently executed, omnipresent gender-based discrimination and the lack of fair judicial trials. Germany therefore recommends Iran to 1. End the execution of death sentences and abolish the death penalty entirely, especially for political and religious offences and non-violent crimes such as drug offences and most eminently for minors. 2. End gender-based discrimination and respect the rights and freedom of women to make their own choices. 3. Allow all citizens the freedom of expression, freedom of the media and freedom of assembly. 4. Comply with international standards regarding police deployment and judicial proceedings. Ensure immediate and free choice of legal support in all judicial cases at any time of the proceeding. 5. End discrimination of religious and ethnic minorities. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Gambia by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Gambia warmly welcomes the delegation from the Islamic Republic of Iran and expresses appreciation for their engagement with the Human Rights Council today. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, the Gambia commends Iran for its impressive progress in bridging the gender gap in primary and secondary education and expanding healthcare coverage. To support continued progress, the Gambia offers the following recommendations. 1. Ratify the conventions against torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, and the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. 2. Ensure the independence of the judiciary by guaranteeing it operates free from all forms of interference. 3. Strengthen legal protections for women and girls by implementing comprehensive measures to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. My delegation wishes the distinguished delegation from Iran a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Georgia welcomes and thanks the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran for the presentation of the national report. We know the efforts of the government of Iran to create legal framework and necessary structures in order to address existing gaps and challenges, and the measures undertaken by the government in order to fulfill its international obligations. Here, we, Georgia, would like to recommend to the Islamic Republic of Iran, 1, to take further steps to give full effect to existing legal framework on promotion and protection on child's rights, and 2, to intensify its work towards protection of women's rights. With this in mind, we wish the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran a successful review, I think.
Thank you. Je donne la parole au distingué représentant.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of France. Thank you, President. France welcomes the delegation of Iran. We take note of measures taken by Iran since the last review. France makes the following recommendations. 1, establish a moratorium on death penalties and executions. 2, end arbitrary detention and torture, including of foreigners, and guarantee respect for the right to a fair trial and impartial judiciary. 3, end all forms of violence against women and girls, and end all discrimination against them by respecting their fundamental rights and freedoms. 4, take steps to guarantee civil and political rights and public freedoms, especially freedom of expression, opinion and peaceful assembly. Finally, eliminate all forms of violence, discrimination on an ethnic or religious basis. Thank you.
Merci. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ghana extends a warm welcome to the delegation of Iran and thank them for the presentation of their report. We commend Iran for accession to 5 main human rights treaties and for the commitment towards gender equality evidenced by the several appointments of women into government. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Ghana recommends to Iran to 1, revise existing legislation to ensure that it does not unduly restrict the exercise of freedom of assembly and expression in ways that are incompatible with international human rights law, especially by minority groups and journalists. And 2, consider acceding to the UN Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greece welcomes the delegation of Iran to the 4th UPR cycle. We express our serious concern about the human rights situation in the country. Greece would like to recommend that Iran, 1, ensure that all human rights defenders and their families are not threatened with or subjected to intimidation, harassment, arbitrary arrest, deprivation of liberty or life, or other arbitrary sanctions. 2, repeal or amend laws that discriminate against women and girls, in particular those on the mandatory hijab. 3, introduce an immediate moratorium on the use of the death penalty with a view to abolishing it and prohibit the execution of child offenders in all circumstances. 4, end all forms of discrimination and persecution on the basis of person's religion or belief. 5, cooperate fully with international human rights mechanisms. And 6, decriminalize insolvency and eliminate the option of imprisoning the insolvent until they satisfy or settle their debt. We wish the delegation of Islamic Republic of Iran a successful UPR cycle. Thank you.
Merci. À ce stade, je redonne la parole à la délégation.
I would now like to give the floor back to the delegation in order to respond to comments and observations made hitherto. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. In light of the questions, I would like to invite His Excellency Mr. Mortadoi, the Honourable Member of the Parliament and a member of the Foreign Policy and National Security Council Committee of the Islamic Republic of Iran, to make his address. The floor is yours.
In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Iran, with its 7,000-year-old civilization, and as a member state of the United Nations, supports the promotion of human rights and the necessity of strengthening universal adherence to human rights, free from biased and politicized approaches. We consider ourselves committed to fostering peace, and behind that positive peace, a peace that promotes the observance of human rights by all and adherence to higher ethical values. The Iranian Parliament, as an independent body directly elected by the vote of people, operates in two spheres: legislation and oversight of proper law enforcement. It is capable of enacting any law deemed necessary. In recent years, we have passed laws under the titles of the 6th and 7th development plans, which provide the foundations for the country's periodic progress to achieve the aforementioned goals. Additionally, during the 3rd cycle of implementing the recommendations, the Iranian Parliament enacted important laws, all of which directly or indirectly pertain to human rights and its various dimensions, including the law mandating the government to provide subsidies to the people for essential goods, the Protection of Children and Adolescents Act, which criminalizes instances of offenses and violence against children, the Transparency Act for the 3 branches of government, executive agencies and other institutions, the establishment of the Natural Disaster Insurance Fund Act, the Housing Production Leap Act, the Facilitation of Business Licensing Act, the Teacher Ranking System Act, the Protection of Whistleblowers Act, the Act on Organizing and Supervising Border Trade and Creating Sustainable Employment for Border Residents, the Family Support and Population Growth Promotion Act, approval of the general framework for the Bill on Preventing Harm to Women and Enhancing their Security, and the adoption of laws related to rural development within the 6th and 7th development plans. These laws emphasize sustainable development with a focus on human rights, sustainable employment, protection of women, children, families, mothers, and pregnant women, support for vulnerable professions and groups, and environmental protection from a human rights perspective. These efforts are considered steps toward realizing the human rights of all members of society. The Article 90 Commission of the Constitution, as an effective and permanent structure within the framework of the Parliament, is responsible for addressing any complaint, demand, or objection from individuals or groups of people against the 3 branches of government in various areas. This commission also addresses complaints from non-Iranian nationals. Over the past 4 years, nearly 10,000 cases have been filed and addressed by the Article 90 Commission. Additionally, in recent years, 2 parliamentary caucuses have been formed, the Non-Governmental Organizations Caucus and the Caucus for Supporting the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, in addition to Women's Caucus. All specialized committees of the Islamic Consultative Assembly, as well as the Guardian Council of the Constitution, ensure compliance with Iran's international commitments related to human rights conventions to which we are a party. We expect these principles to form the basis of others' interactions with Iran. Unfortunately, the unjust sanctions imposed by certain global powers who are themselves members of the United Nations violate these principles and disregard the rights of the Iranian people. We expect the United Nations Human Rights Council and its stakeholders to fulfill the inherent responsibilities and prevent such violations, which are undoubtedly a breach of the rights of the Iranian nation. In conclusion, we invite all to a collective commitment to upholding human rights. Thank you very much for your kind attention in UPR working group. And at the same time, I appreciate the comments made by other speakers.
Thank you. I would now like to invite Dr. Jalalian, the Honorable Deputy Minister for Justice in Human Rights and International Affairs, to talk about the rights of the child. The floor is yours. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as the representative of the Ministry of Justice of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is tasked with the responsibility as the national authority of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, I am honored to advise of the latest legal and executive achievements in the field of protecting the rights of the child. The government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, in line with the Convention of the Rights of the Child and in accordance with the principles of its constitution, has based its public and strategic policy on respecting the best interests of children. The adoption of the law on protection of children and adolescents in May 2020 and the establishment of the Supreme Council of Adolescents and Youth, chaired by the President, are among the most important legal developments that, together with the two laws on the protection of orphaned and neglected children and the law on protection of the family, provide the necessary foundations for the realization of children's rights. According to this law, if a child is at risk, the relevant agencies, such as the prosecutor's office and the welfare organization, are obliged to protect the child. In order to achieve the goals of this law, offices for the protection of children and adolescents of the judiciary have been established in justice departments throughout the country. In the field of ensuring the right to health of children, special measures have been taken in the past 4 years, the most important of which are the implementation of a free treatment plan for children under 7 years of age and the establishment of 34 specialized hospitals to support mothers and children. Also, the mortality rate of children under 5 years of age has decreased from 14.2 per 1,000 in 2019 to 13 in 2023. With the measures taken, students have access to the country's formal education, and girls' access to the education system has increased by 220% in the years after the victory of the Islamic Revolution. Education of students, even in the most remote areas, was not halted during the coronavirus pandemic, and the government provided various solutions and took certain measures for everyone to access education, no one left behind, to prevent school dropouts. Important measures have been taken, including criminalizing the prevention of education of students, including even immigrants and refugees, creating diversity in opportunities such as distance education and boarding schools, creating a dedicated system for identification and attraction of dropouts, using the capacities of external organizations such as benefactors, philanthropists, NGOs, and UNICEF, especially in rural areas. Regarding children with disabilities, a 20% growth has been achieved in the implementation of inclusive education, 50 counseling and guidance centers for students with special needs, 754 special learning problem centers, and 850 counselors have been established in the country for this very purpose. In order to achieve judicial justice for children and adolescents, the following effective measures have been taken in the course of the past 4 years. Preparation of national guidelines for decriminalization of juvenile offences with the aim of creating the groundwork for non-judicial resolution of offences related to children. Implementation of a counselling system in juvenile courts in order to maximize the use of alternative institutions and alternative punishments to imprisonment. Preparation of 2 instructions in the implementation of Article 91 of the Islamic Penal Code in order to provide the necessary training to forensic doctors and judges of juvenile cases with the aim of controlling the issuance of death sentences. Establishment of special branches of investigation and criminal court to deal with cases of child abuse in the judicial system, and holding 30 workshops on the juvenile justice system to train judges, lawyers, law enforcement and social workers. In order to support laboring children, working children, in addition to Iran's membership in the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the sale, prostitution and pornography of children, the new law on the protection of children and adolescents criminalizes economic exploitation of persons under 18 years of age. In this regard, the Social Support for Working and Street Children project has been implemented with the aim of empowering children and families and helping them to get out of the welfare organizations' support cycle. In order to combat violence against children, according to the law, any physical or corporal punishment is prohibited under any circumstances in schools, and in order to eradicate it, social programs along with administrative and criminal penalties have been considered. It should be noted that early marriage under the legal age in Iran is a rejected phenomena in Iran and is contrary to the general policies of the country. Of course, it should be noted that if in some rare cases girls' marriage under the legal age has occurred, it is mainly related to some areas with their own local traditions and cultures. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for the presentation. In conclusion, I would like to invite Dr. Nowruzpour, the Deputy Minister for Media and Advertisement of the Ministry of Islamic Guidance and Culture, who will be talking about the freedom of expression and access to information. The floor is yours.
In the name of God. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic Republic of Iran places great importance on the right to freedom of expression and access to information as a fundamental human right, which serves as a cornerstone for the realization of other human rights. Accordingly, Iran has taken measures to respect, promote, and implement this right in all its forms. The history of Iran's press law dates back more than 117 years. This law ensures the protection of national rights, citizenship rights, and the rights of media professionals and journalists alike. Article 4 of the press law explicitly states no governmental or non-governmental authority has the right to exert pressure on the press to publish or not publish any article or content, nor to engage in censorship or control of publications. Additionally, the note to this article provides for penalties against violators. Recognizing the importance of technological advancements and the emergence of new media, the Islamic Republic of Iran has undertaken extensive measures to facilitate access to information and provide a conducive environment for media activities, including reforming procedures for issuing licenses and simplifying access to media services, establishing advanced communication infrastructure in underprivileged and rural areas to ensure equal access to high-speed internet and bridge the digital divide, providing grants to media content creators and enhancing capacities for multilingual content production, direct and indirect subsidies to active media organizations, promoting a people-centric culture and striving for media justice across ethnic, religious, gender, and geographical dimensions, strengthening legal mechanisms and forming support groups for journalists and media managers. Moreover, to enhance digital rights and expand access to information and communication technologies, the following initiatives have been implemented: participation in the drafting of the Global Digital Compact, launching open data platforms to increase transparency, accountability, and innovation, establishing dozens of innovation centers and supporting startups in the media sector, designing 21 educational programs to utilize artificial intelligence in media, comprehensive measures to combat fake news, strengthening international cooperation for the transfer of knowledge and technology in the field of media and information through cultural and media agreements with several countries, establishing a system for publishing and accessing open information and connecting over 2,000 public and private institutions to it, enabling citizens to exercise their right to access information. Mr. President, through these measures, a suitable environment has been created for journalists, reporters, and media professionals. A few notable points are as follows. By the end of December 2024, more than 14,000 registered media outlets were operational, including over 5,000 in print media, 5,000 online media, and over 3,000 offline digital media. Women make up over 40% of journalists and editorial board members in Iranian media. 320 journalists from 151 foreign media outlets representing 30 countries currently operate in Iran, reflecting a 10.5% increase compared to the previous period. 806 women serve as media managers. 26 media outlets belonging to religious minorities, including Jewish, Armenian, Assyrian, and Zoroastrian communities. Internet access for 116 million users with a penetration rate of 137%. Operation of 34 provincial and local broadcasting networks and nearly 300 media outlets managed by ethnic communities, including Azeris, Kurds, Arabs, and Baluchs, aimed at preserving local languages, cultural heritage, and ethnic identities, lifting restrictions on citizen access to widely used platforms, such as recently WhatsApp, and supporting the development of new domestic communication platforms. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, measures have been taken to ensure that media professionals face fewer administrative and judicial obstacles. As a result, the professional and disciplinary violations are primarily addressed by the Press Supervisory Board, a supragovernmental body. If severe violations are referred to court, they are adjudicated in accordance with the Constitution, with the presence of a jury. Mr. President, Excellencies, the efforts of the Islamic Republic of Iran to guarantee freedom of expression and access to information are serious and far exceed some alleged shortcomings. These endeavors reflect Iran's commitment to fostering a transparent, just, and inclusive environment where the rights and dignity of all members of society are respected and existing gaps are minimized. Thank you for your kind attention.
Merci. Avec le dialogue interactif.
Thank you. We'll continue with the interactive dialogue, and I'd like to give the floor to Iceland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Iceland welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran and its national report. In a constructive spirit, Iceland recommends the following. 1. Abolish the death penalty. 2. Cease all executions pending the abolition of the death penalty. 3. Share comprehensive data on the death penalty and executions with the UN. 4. Repeal the hijab and custody law and all other laws enforcing compulsory veiling and discriminatory dress codes. 5. Criminalize all forms of gender-based violence and guarantee accountability for all GBV acts, including state-sponsored violence. 6. Decriminalize same-sex relations between consenting adults. 7. Ensure that persons of diverse societies are not subject to electric shocks and other forms of torture. I wish Iran all success for its review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Mr. President, we welcome the delegation and acknowledge the progress made by Iran on India's recommendations during their third UPR in 2019. We also appreciate Iran's agreement on the 2023-27 UN SDG cooperation framework their efforts to provide social insurance to non-working mothers in rural and nomadic areas, and housing for female heads of households. We note the challenges highlighted in the UN report regarding Iran's access to life-saving medicines and medical equipment. India recommends the following to Iran. First, to establish a national human rights institution on priority in accordance with principles outlined in the Paris Declaration. Second, continue ongoing efforts to improve universal access to education and health, including for disabled, underprivileged, and vulnerable groups. Third, to strengthen legislative framework and subsequent policy implementation to improve women's status in employment, leadership and family, and aligning with the international commitments. And fourth, to consider undertaking steps to sign and ratify Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Indonesia welcomes the distinguished delegation of Iran and appreciates its UPR report. Indonesia commends Iran's continued commitment and efforts to address existing gaps and challenges in its legal frameworks and institutions. The significant increase in girls' enrollment in schools, as well as the expansion of health coverage in both rural and urban areas, are noteworthy achievements. We remain concerned about the impact of unilateral coercive measures on the well-being of the population of Iran. In the spirit of constructive cooperation, Indonesia wishes to recommend that Iran, 1, continue working to effectively implement laws, regulation, and policies addressing discrimination and violence against women. 2, strengthen efforts to improve the quality of education by, among others, increasing resources for teacher training programs. 3, enhance initiatives to address unemployment and poverty, particularly in rural areas. We wish Iran a successful UPR, and thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the President and members of the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we commend its efforts in the preparation and submission of its 4th UPR report. We also commend the classification of Iran among the high human development in accordance with the UNDP Program on Human Development of 2022. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we have the following recommendations. First, to pursue efforts so that women and young people have equal job opportunities. Second, give priority to combating poverty, especially in rural and underprivileged areas. Third, to intensify efforts to improve social development, social care, especially for women, children, and youth in rural areas. Fourth, develop policies in order to grant equal opportunities between men and women to bridge the gender gap. And the President interrupts.
Ireland, you have the floor.
Ireland thanks the delegation of Iran for its presentation, and Ireland is concerned, President, by the continued harassment, arrest and arbitrary detention of human rights defenders, particularly women human rights defenders and those advocating for the rights of women and girls. We are concerned also by reports of continued discrimination against ethnic and religious minorities, including members of the Baha'i faith. Ireland remains deeply concerned at the increased use of the death penalty in Iran. Ireland recommends that Iran, 1, establish a moratorium on executions and immediately cease the issuing of death sentences for individuals under the age of 18 at the time of their alleged crime, in line with Iran's obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And 2, ratify and fully implement the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and ensure that the human rights of women and girls are fully respected, protected and fulfilled. We wish Iran every success in this UPR cycle. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Israel remains deeply concerned over the systematic and abhorrent suppression of fundamental human rights in Iran and by Iran. The death penalty targeting ethnic minorities such as Kurds, Baha'i, Balochi and Christians disproportionately remains widespread. Women and girls continue to face relentless systematic violence. Israel recommends that Iran end the persecution of minorities and ensure equal access to education, employment and social services, seize censorship online and offline, abolish the death penalty, revoke the 2023 regulations controlling the Iranian Bar Association, reject the bill for protection of family, and ensure the full human rights of women and girls. Iran's destabilizing actions across the Middle East contribute to further human rights violations. This must stop. Thank you.
I have a point of order from the delegation of Iran.
Mr. President, actually I have a point of order with respect to the irrelevant statement by the previous speakers to the UPR session of Iran. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Italy is the delegation of Iran and takes note of the effort carried out since the last UPR cycle. Italy recommends Iran to 1. Introduce a moratorium on execution with a view to the complete abolition of the death penalty and ban executions for crimes committed by minors. Introduce alternative punishment for drug-related crimes. 2. Strengthen the effort to combat all forms of discrimination and harmful practices against women and girls, including by refraining from adopting mandatory dress codes and by raising to 18 years the minimum legal marriage age. 3. Take the necessary measure to guarantee equal rights for all citizens and counter the discrimination of ethnic and religious minorities, with particular regard to Baha'i. 4. Guarantee freedom of opinion, expression and assembly, and cease arresting human rights defenders peacefully exercising these rights. Italy wishes Iran a successful UPR. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Japan warmly welcomes the delegation of Iran to this session. Japan appreciates Iran's cooperative approach to the work of OSHR, the special procedure mandate holders. We welcome Iran's effort to promote and protect the rights of refugees and migrants by providing opportunity for primary and higher education to a large number of Afghan refugees and migrant youth and young adults. While acknowledging Iran's ongoing effort in this area, in order to further improve the human rights situation in the country, Japan would like to make 3 recommendations. 1. Take additional measures to promote and protect women's rights. 2. Redouble effort to promote and protect the rights of minorities. And 3. Strengthen action to promote and protect the freedom of expression. Japan wishes the delegation of Iran every success in this review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kazakhstan by video.
Mr. President, Kazakhstan warmly welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the 4th cycle of UPR and thanks for the presentation of its national report. My delegation commends Iran for the adoption of the law on reduction of working hours of female workers with special conditions, including women with disabilities or with disabled or sick children or spouses, as well as women with children under 6 years of age, and for bridging the gender gap in primary and secondary education, with the increase of female enrollment in primary education by 115% and in the secondary education by 84%. We would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Continue its constructive dialogue with human rights treaty bodies. 2. Consider the capacity of United Nations agencies and programs to advance national human rights programs. 3. Continue its long-standing bilateral human rights dialogues and exchange of experience in the field of human rights with other countries. We wish the delegation of Iran a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya.
President, Kenya commends Iran for its efforts to improve human rights since its last UPR cycle. Notable progress has been made in several key areas, including taking steps to strengthen legal and institutional frameworks for human rights protection through inter alia, the adoption of the law of the protection of children and adolescents, and the recently enacted law on transparency of government bodies. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we offer 2 recommendations for consideration. 1, we recommend that Iran expedite the process of establishing its national human rights institution in full compliance with the Paris Principles, ensuring its independence and effectiveness in promoting and protecting human rights. 2, we strongly encourage Iran to build upon its initial steps and move forward with full accession to and implementation of the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, and Degrading Treatment or Punishment. We wish the delegation of Iran a most successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation would like to welcome the head and members of the delegation of the Friendly Islamic Republic of Iran. We have viewed with interest the report under review, and we express our appreciation for the efforts exerted in order to promote the rights of children and adolescents and to improve the document on the protection of children and adolescents online. Under a constructive dialogue, we would like to recommend the following: to pursue efforts to exchange experiences with other countries on the protection of children and persons with disabilities, to take effective and serious measures to support economic, social and cultural rights in a manner that goes in line with the right to development, and to take additional measures to improve the indices of human development. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Lao People's Democratic Republic.
Mr. President, my delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of Iran to this UPR cycle and thanks for the comprehensive report. The Laopedia commends Iran's strong commitment to promote and protect human rights in the country and engagement with the UN human rights mechanisms, including the OSCE, treaty bodies, and the special procedure. We also commend the progress made in improving children's rights, especially bridging the gender gap at the primary and secondary education. In this spirit, the Laopedia would like to offer 2 recommendations. 1, further advancing the promotion and protection of the rights of children. And 2, continue efforts to provide necessary resources for improving education system and ensuring equal access to education by all. We wish Iran a successful review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Latvia remains gravely concerned by the deteriorating human rights situation in Iran, the government's systematic denial of basic freedoms, executions, unlawful arrests, brutal crackdown on women and girls. We strongly condemn Iran's continuous support to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Latvia recommends 1, to take immediate measures to eradicate systematic discrimination, arbitrary arrests, sexual violence, and deprivation of fundamental rights of women and girls. 2, to ratify the Rome Statute. 3, to establish a moratorium on the death penalty. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
Mr. President, Lebanon warmly welcomes the delegation of Iran and thanks them for the national report and introductory remarks. Lebanon recognizes Iran's efforts to promote social and economic rights despite the multifaceted challenges the country is facing. In a constructive spirit, Lebanon would like to recommend the Islamic Republic, 1, to continue its active engagement with the global human rights mechanism, 2, to pursue the efforts aiming at providing human rights training to relevant stakeholders, including in judiciary and law enforcement agencies, as well as information campaigns addressed to the wider public. 3, to continue efforts in favor of sustainable development in urban and rural areas in a balancing manner between economic growth and environmental preservation. In conclusion, Lebanon wishes Iran all success in its review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Libya by video.
Mr. President, we would like to welcome the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we thank them for their comprehensive report and their positive cooperation with the UPR. And under constructive interaction and dialogue, we recommended to pursue awareness-raising programs in the field of human rights. Second, to pursue efforts to provide additional protection to the rights of women, girls, especially the girl child. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Mr. President. On various occasions, Liechtenstein has consistently raised serious concerns about the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We strongly support the work and mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur, as well as the fact-finding mission, and urge Iran to cooperate with these mandates. In a constructive spirit, Liechtenstein recommends that Iran, 1, establish a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to abolishing it, 2, ratify the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. 3, ratify the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. 4, repeal or amend laws that discriminate against women and girls and bring them in line with international human rights standards. And 5, release individuals that were prosecuted and punished for exercising their rights, in particular the right to freedom of peaceful assembly. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. President. We deplore Iran's ongoing military support to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. We're also alarmed by serious human rights violations committed with impunity, including by public officials and security personnel, especially murder, imprisonment,
I have a point of order from the delegation of Iran.
Sexual violence, persecution, and enforced.
Mr. Ambassador, sorry, I have a point of order from the delegation of Iran. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, according to the rule, those that are in today's meetings just should remain through the mandate of these meetings and be respecting the mandate that is with respect to the UPR session of Iran. And bringing the other issues that are irrelevant to what we are discussing here, it is expected that you force and enforce the rule here. Thank you.
Thank you. The delegation of Lithuania has the floor.
Thank you. The crackdown on civic space persists. The number of death penalties and executions is appalling. Lithuania recommends Iran to 1, ensure the protection of women and girls against all forms of violence, mistreatment, and systemic discrimination. 2, stop the executions and pursue a consistent policy towards the abolition of death penalty. 3, ensure respect of the rights of religious minorities by seizing all forms of discrimination and persecution of Baha'i and other religious communities. 4, immediately and unconditionally release and rehabilitate all persons arbitrarily arrested and detained in the context of the protest or for non-compliance with or advocacy against the mandatory hijab. I thank you.
Thank you. Je passe la parole à la
I now call on the distinguished representative of Luxembourg. Thank you, President. Luxembourg welcomes the Iranian delegation and thanks it for presenting its national report. In a constructive spirit, Luxembourg would like to make the following recommendations. 1, to impose a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its definitive abolition. 2, ensure full access to the country for special procedures. 3, fully apply the provisions of the International Covenant on the Civil and Political Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And 4, stop institutionalized discrimination and segregation against women and girls. 5, immediately release people arrested for having taken part in the demonstrations following the death of Gina Mahsa Amini. 6, stop persecuting religious and ethnic minorities, particularly the Baha'i, Kurds, Ahwazi, Baloch and Turkmen. And 7, repeal the laws criminalizing homosexual relationships and transgender identities. We wish Iran every success in implementing the recommendations from this UPR.
Representative of Malaysia by video.
Malaysia thanks the Islamic Republic of Iran for the presentation of its national report. Malaysia acknowledges the challenges Iran faces due to unilateral coercive measures that negatively impact human rights. We welcome Iran's continuous engagement with human rights mechanism and encourage Iran to continue this constructive engagement to further improve the human rights situation in the country. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Malaysia recommends the following. First, expedite efforts to establish a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. Second, enhance cooperation with the thematic special procedures of the Human Rights Council by considering their country visits. Third, increase efforts to enhance women's representation in leadership and decision-making roles. We wish the Islamic Republic of Iran a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Maldives.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Maldives welcomes the high-level delegation from the Islamic Republic of Iran to this fourth cycle review and thanks them for their presentation today. The Maldives commends Iran's efforts to create legal frameworks and necessary structures to resolve gaps and challenges in the normative and institutional framework for the protection and promotion of human rights. In constructive spirit, the Maldives presents the following 2 recommendations. 1, enact laws, regulations, and policy frameworks that ensure the full and effective protection against all forms of ethnic, national, and racial discrimination. 2, continue strengthening efforts to align domestic legislation with human rights obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD. We wish Iran a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Je donne la parole au distingué.
I call on the distinguished representative of Mali. Thank you, President. Mali bids a warm welcome to the Iranian delegation and would like to also congratulate Iran on the huge progress made in promoting and protecting human rights, particularly by opening 34 specialised hospitals for taking care of mothers and children, building and modernising 350,000 rural houses and extending the coverage of water supply to reach 96.93% of the population. We also welcome the legalisation of NGOs so that they can go about their business in a safe and appropriate environment. This also covers women and young people who can go about their activities as well. We have the following recommendations. 1, improve the quality of education in rural areas and improve access of older persons to various services. In conclusion, Mali wishes Iran every success in this review. Thank you.
The distinguished representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. We take note of Iran's national report, and we are gravely concerned about the deteriorating human rights situation, in particular the crackdowns on women and girls, and Iran's frequent and increasing use of the death penalty. Malta presents the following recommendations. 1. Ensure full cooperation and access to the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Iran and the independent international fact-finding mission on Iran set up by HRC Resolution S35/1. 2. We reiterate our recommendation for the third cycle to ensure that all individuals in custody receive adequate health care and treatment, including preventive measures such as screening for medical conditions free of charge and without discrimination. 3. Abolish all instances of the death penalty and all relevant legislation. 4. Ensure that the rights of all minorities in social and religious life are fully protected. 5. Repeal the law on the protection of the family through the promotion of the culture and of chastity and hijab. 6. Ratify all outstanding human rights conventions, including the Convention on the Protection of all Persons from Enforced Disappearance. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Marshall Islands by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of the Marshall Islands thanks the esteemed delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran for their report. We recommend the following. 1. Abolish the death penalty for all crimes without exception. 2. Take steps toward the ratification of the Convention Against Torture. 3. Adopt concrete measures to eliminate discrimination and enhance the protection of the human rights of the Baha'is and other minority communities in the country. 4. Urgently undertake measures to promote and protect women's rights, including the ratification of CEDAW. And 5. Align its NDCs with the Paris Agreement goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Como dada, and I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Thank you, President. We thank Iran for its report and we commend the visit of the Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights to the country last year. We also acknowledge efforts in law to ensure that Iranian women married to foreigners can pass on their nationality to their children. In a constructive and respectful spirit, we recommend 1. Ratify the CEDAW Convention, criminalise domestic violence and honour crimes, and adopt measures to protect persons affected by domestic violence. 2. Impose an immediate moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its abolition. 3. Decriminalise homosexual sex between consenting adults. And 4. Prohibit any form of discrimination and marginalisation of ethnic and or religious minorities and ensure their inclusion in society and protect them from all forms of violence. We wish Iran every success in this review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Montenegro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Montenegro welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We acknowledge the efforts in advancing human rights and renewing engagement with human rights mechanisms. We take positive initiatives to improve the rights of the child, training of respective authorities in order to handle child protection cases sensitively. We encourage the government to ensure free and equal education for all children, including refugees and minorities, and to support girls' education. We express deep concerns about the increase of executions between 2 UPR cycles, including the executions of minors. Montenegro makes the following recommendations: to introduce a moratorium on the death penalty, particularly for children, as a first step towards abolition, and to provide opportunities for change for further empowerment of women, ensuring their full and systemic equality with men. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Namibia warmly welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the fourth UPR cycle and thanks them for their comprehensive report. We commend the development in 2023 of a bill on protecting women against violence and promoting their dignity and security. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we wish to offer the following recommendation. 1. Ratify the core international human rights treaties to which Iran is not yet a party, in particular the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. 2. Intensify efforts to establish a national human rights institution in accordance with the Paris Principles. And 3. Introduce a moratorium on the use of the death penalty with a view to its complete abolition. We wish the Islamic Republic of Iran a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nepal.
Mr. President, Nepal welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the fourth cycle of UPR and thanks them for presenting the national report. We take positive note of Iran's several initiatives to ensure right to political participation, peaceful assembly and association. Equally noteworthy is the significant increase in the number of female students, which increased by 115% in primary school and by 84% in high school. In a constructive spirit, we recommend Iran the following. 1. Continue efforts to improve food security and healthcare services. 2. Consider efforts toward ending child marriage. 3. Continue efforts to increase political participation of women. 4. Redouble efforts to establish a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principle. We wish Iran a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands thanks Iran for the presentation of its report and commends the efforts to host the world's largest refugee population. We remain seriously concerned about the escalating number of executions, the grave discrimination and persecution of women, girls, LGBTIQ+ persons, as well as ethnic and religious minorities like the Baha'i. The practice of arbitrary detention for political gains also continues to be of serious concern and a violation of international law. Therefore, we recommend Iran to 1. Impose a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its abolition. 2. Immediately release all persons detained for peacefully exercising their rights to freedom of expression, association and assembly, including those advocating for the abolition of discrimination against women and girls, and all those further arbitrarily detained. 3. Repeal the provisions in the Islamic Penal Code that criminalize consensual same-sex activities between adults. We wish Iran success with the implementation and follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
Mr. President, New Zealand welcomes the delegation from the Islamic Republic of Iran. We acknowledge Iran's role as host to the world's largest refugee population and the access it provides to key services for the most vulnerable, particularly in healthcare and education. New Zealand recommends that Iran, 1, establish a moratorium on executions with a view to abolishing the death penalty. 2, amend Article 91 of the Islamic Penal Code to prohibit the use of the death penalty for crimes committed by persons below 18 years of age in all circumstances. 3, ratify the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 4, review and repeal legislation and policies that discriminate on the grounds of religion or belief, sexual orientation and gender identity. And 5, ensure that all allegations of those arrested or detained during the protests of September 2022 involving torture or other ill treatment are transparently and impartially investigated, with those responsible held to account. We thank the delegation for their participation and consideration of these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nicaragua.
Thank you, President. Nicaragua firmly supports the brotherly people and government of Iran. Over the past 40 years, the United States and some European countries have imposed unilateral coercive measures against Iran. They're illegal and extraterritorial and violated the fundamental rights of Iranians. They have left irreparable human, financial and emotional damage with effects that have been passed on from one generation to the next and across borders. This clearly contradicts the UN Charter, international law, international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and violate the covenants. Despite these criminal measures, Iran continues to meet its human rights commitments, recommendations, further laws to foster women's rights, participating women in decision-taking and management of one of the gender justice indicators, and the law to protect children and adolescents, and further work on policies to achieve economic, social and cultural rights of the brotherly people of Iran. Thank you very much.
Representative of Niger. Niger.
Merci.
Thank you, President. The Niger delegation bids a warm welcome to the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we'd like to congratulate you on the presentation of your national report. We're pleased to see the significant achievements of Iran, notably in implementing the recommendations on cross-cutting issues in the last cycle. In a constructive spirit, we recommend, 1, continue to explore the possibility of acceding to the International Convention on the Rights of all Migrant Workers and their family members, and 2, increase the participation of civil society in planning and adopting plans to adapt to climate change and improve their preparation and your ability to react to natural disasters. By way of conclusion, my delegation wishes Iran every success in this review. I thank you.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nigeria by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nigeria welcomes the delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran to the presentation of its national report for the 4th UPR cycle. We commend the government for its cooperation with human rights mechanisms, including UPR process and efforts in implementing previous recommendations. We take positive note and commend Iran for its achievement in the provision of healthcare services, bridging educational gap, and implementing social welfare programs, particularly to older persons and persons with disabilities. While acknowledging the efforts of the government of Iran to promote and protect human rights, Nigeria wishes to recommend as follows: to continue efforts in promoting and protecting the rights of women and girls, as well as persons with disabilities, and to sustain and enhance initiatives aimed at improving the social economic well-being of its people. Finally, we wish Iran every success in its review process. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of North Macedonia.
Mr. President, North Macedonia thanks Iran for its presentation. We remain deeply concerned over the overall human rights situation in Iran, especially by the high number of executions exercised by the authorities. Therefore, we recommend that Iran, 1, immediately establish an official moratorium on executions with a view to abolishing the death penalty. 2, abolish all laws, regulations, and procedures that discriminate directly against all women and girls, especially towards Baha'i women who are arbitrarily arrested and detained, and ensure their protection from further harassment. 3, accept all outstanding visit requests of UN special procedures, including the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran. And 4, establish a national human rights institution in accordance with the Paris principles. We wish Iran a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
Thank you, President. We'd like to congratulate the delegation from the Islamic Republic of Iran for its excellent presentation. We appreciate your cooperation with the UPR mechanism because we believe that it's voluntary and not imposed mechanisms which will bring the best results for human rights. We underscore the progress achieved during this last cycle, despite the imposition of unilateral coercive measures which violate the human rights of your people. We have the following respectful recommendations. 1, pursue the progress in promoting and protecting human rights despite the imposition of unilateral coercive measures. 2, step up efforts to achieve literacy for all, particularly in rural areas. 3, pursue initiatives to ensure equal education for all. 4, put further efforts into the health system transformation plan to ensure that there is equal access to high-quality medical services for all, and strengthen the state welfare organisation to provide support to vulnerable groups, including persons with disabilities and older persons. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Denmark.
Thank you, President. Denmark welcomes the Islamic Republic of Iran and thanks it for the presentation. We remain deeply concerned about the dire human rights situation in Iran, including the number of executions, which remains amongst the highest in the world, as well as discrimination against women and girls and the use of torture. Denmark recommends Iran to 1, abolish the death penalty, 2, put an end to all discrimination against women, including by ensuring legal protection against marital rape and domestic violence, and 3, ratify the Convention Against Torture. Denmark wishes the Islamic Republic of Iran a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
السيد الرئيس بداية نود الترحيب بوفد جمهورية إيران.
Thank you, President. At the outset, please allow me to bid a warm welcome to the delegation from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Would like to also congratulate you on efforts to improve the human rights situation. We appreciate the efforts made by the government to promote and protect human rights, as well as the efforts to ensure better human rights education. My delegation has the following recommendations. 1, make further efforts to improve the quality of education, particularly in rural areas.